Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's luncheon event at the Rumi Forum in Washington, D.C. I'm Tariq Shafi. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Necati Aydin, and the title of his talk is Global Financial Crisis and the Fate of Capitalism. Dr. Aydin is the Director of Neuroeconomics and Wellbeing Program at Florida State University. This program specializes in well-being studies both at individual and societal levels, bringing experts from different subject matters to conduct qualitative and quantitative analyses of happiness-related issues. Dr. Aydin received his bachelor's degree in public finance, master's in international economics, and doctoral degrees in both education and economics. He has conducted research in a variety of topics, including local and state government budget analysis, economic impact studies, tourism, higher education, virtual education, information technology, and Medicaid. I sure hope I haven't left anything out. This next accomplishment is quite notable. He has completed over 30 research projects, authored 6, translated 2, and co-authored 3 books. He has published many peer-reviewed articles on top of that. He also writes op-ed articles in Zaman, the most widely circulated Turkish newspaper. And in fact, I personally had the pleasure of visiting the headquarters in Istanbul just recently. He has written several articles and book chapters on happiness in Turkish and English for several years. One of his articles on happiness, titled The Struggle Between Virtue versus Decadence, The Struggle of Civilizations Within the Global Village, was published in England in book form. The other, titled Happiness, Crisis of Global Capitalism, was published in Turkish. Dr. Aydin currently is working on a book project titled A Happiness Path for Everybody. What could be better? Dr. Aydin is married and has 5 children, and that fact alone must give him a lot of happiness. All right, with that said, Dr. Aydin, I was intrigued, and I was talking to somebody just earlier, and they use the same word. They were intrigued at the title of your talk. Again, it is Global Financial Crisis and the Fate of Capitalism. Just to take the second half of this title, The Fate of Capitalism, sounds fatalistic as presented by you. And of course, you can talk about what caused the present global financial crisis, and perhaps you feel or are implying or in fact saying that capitalism as we know it, that is practiced in the Western democracies, USA, Great Britain, the so-called Anglo-Saxon capitalism, is on the verge of death or is actually dying or is dead, and what would take its place if it does die. So without further ado, I would now give the proceedings to Dr. Aydin.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you for inviting me. So I will try to, in this case, basically answer your question, but ultimately try to really answer the question about the fate of capitalism, if I can. And I think in order to understand that one, first we need to really understand the current financial crisis. Alan Greenspan, the former Fed chairman, called the financial tsunami. And as you know, I'm coming from Florida, and Florida is well known with those kind of tsunami. And I think in this case, Florida is not only the center of those well-known traditional tsunamis, also actually the epicenter of this financial tsunami as well. So that's why I was able to kind of, from my own experience and as an economist, to observe really the development of this crisis, the development of tsunami, and also the impact at the national and global level. What I basically, when I try to really, think on the root cause of this financial crisis, I found it that it's really amazing in a way that it is a kind of a suicidal act and self-deception of perhaps a human being in part of consumer particularly. It's when you try to really see what has happened, is basically you see that within the system, we create a certain environment, let a kind of basically a bubble in particular real estate market, and also in credit, consumer credit as well. So with that one, we see kind of for a few years, maybe 4 or 5 years, everything was really fun, and everyone was really getting credit, and it was extremely available to everybody almost, and everyone was trying to really achieving their famous dream,
yes.
so American dream. But it seems like that dream turned out to be a nightmare ultimately. So it's really interesting to see how come such intelligent being, consumer as well as creditors, have made such mistakes like this, that they did not really pursue what is or foresee what's going on. So I think when I look at it, I see basically we create an environment for a bubble. With that one, we all start to believe that there's no bubble and this is real value in the market. And then we see the value of the real estate goes up and we become wealthier. And then relying what we call the wealth effect, that we start to consume more even. And when we go to creditors, they give us all kind of credit. So with that, then we see enormous boom in the market. And with this one, we see basically those who are very intelligent create a lot of what we call means to repackage all these loans, ultimate or mortgages, to basically make money out of money without working, to just basically earn without working. That's basically what we call interest. In this case, what they did, they tried to sell this dream to everybody. First, those who are in the United States, and mostly those who are in China, those who are in Arab countries, and they receive the money and they actually actualize their dream for a while. But it's you cannot sustain such expense without really working. So you can rely on credit and earning of someone else and have a nice dream, but that dream will ultimately end and is doomed to fail. So that's exactly what happened. So, and ultimately, which in this case, the downturn in economy, and because of perhaps budget deficit and because of the wars, and then we start to see in this case basically this burst in the market, which started in the real estate market, and that spread out over time, and ultimately we found all those financial institutions reach at the end of at the edge of collapse. And then since financial institution in a capitalist system is really like a blood circulation in human body, and once that system collapsed, we actually start to really think about the fate of the system altogether. And then we start to really hear the discussion whether this will be the end for capitalism. So, and that's why I think it's really important to understand that how come such intelligent being could make such mistake, and how come that we, as and as a government, or as, let's say, intellectual, they could not find a way to guide those people or to restrict certain acts or harmful acts or suicidal acts for themselves. So that's why when I look at it, I say, okay, for creditors, capitalist creditors and capitalist consumers, there was nothing wrong when you have available easy credit to just go and get the credit, or for capitalist credit, there was nothing wrong to just lend the money and to make money out of money and to just sell, in this case, a promise, and basically, in this case, a false promise. And because the driving force for capitalist creditor is to maximize a profit.
Yes.
The question is that you try to ask, you say, okay, that was good for your short-term benefit. That's why you were able to really get those bonuses and make a lot of profit. But in the long run, we see it's suicidal. So how come that those intelligent CEOs, well-educated ones, can actually do such suicidal act? I think that's really important question we need to ask. And then I think the second part is, how come the consumers were deceived? They were kind of attracted to those pleasant desserts, but it was poisoned. But they did not really understand that even though they can actually enjoy for a while, but then in the long run, they will, in this case, harm themselves. That's what's happening with this foreclosure and losing their homes. So that's why I think, I try to basically understand the root cause of this crisis. I do not see this as a temporary, I see this as a fundamental crisis of the system, even though I do not see that ultimately this will bring the end to the system, but I think it's really important to understand what are the root cause of the system. So that's why, I kind of follow the discussion on that one, try to reflect on the issue, understand the cause, and I found it very interesting, this interesting discussion on that one. I found like in one book that it's written called Free Market Madness. So basically the idea in that one, the idea is that yes, free market is overall good, but in this case it seems like we see free market madness. But then, and I try to figure out why the system allows such madness in the free market. And then also there's a Nobel Prize laureate, another one, wrote a book called basically explain the cause of the financial crisis as animal spirits. Right. So he argues that, and you will find the same thing from Alan Greenspan as well. Even Keynes himself mentioned that there is something fundamentally unpredictable in human nature, and that's why all those crises is basically coming from or as a result of human nature, and that's why it is, in their argument, you cannot even prevent it. You have to face it. My argument is that no, you need to really understand that. You need to really, in this case, examine human nature. You need to know what are the key elements of human nature causing such, in this case, what we call predictably irrational behaviors. Then how you can actually, in this case, come up with certain policy as a government or as an individual, come up with certain behavior to prevent, or certain principle to prevent such predictably irrational behaviors. So that's basically what I try to understand with this.
Well, animal instincts is a phrase that is used regularly by proponents of capitalism. They say, like democracy, which is the best way to govern that mankind has invented, same with capitalism. It's cutthroat, but the animal instincts in a free market will always bring people who are totally impoverished up, and in the middle classes and the high classes even further up to that pole, that American dream or the Western dream of prosperity. You're saying that there should be checks and balances on that, such as regulation, for example, more oversight, and let's not forget the short-sightedness that you quoted. The G word, greed, came into being, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. The key is that we, as an economist, when we basically talk about, starting from Adam Smith, when we talk about market system, we really know, we kind of think that is, in this case, in Adam Smith's term, that self-interest is the driving force behind the invisible hand, which basically give you the best result if you do not intervene. So that's the idea behind the market system. In this case, just let the people act based on their self-interest. That's the main argument. Then ultimately, they will act in a way to maximize their self-interest, and that maximization will turn out to be the best for society overall. So that's why it's best for you as a government to basically have as little intervention as possible, and just let the market run and does everything. And I think we have seen enormous benefit or fruits of market system, particularly in United States. There's no denial of that one, and I think that you can truly explain, in this case, the success of capitalism against a failure of socialism based on the very same notion of market system. Well, one thing I want to really do, I try to separate capitalism as an ideology from market system. Market system in this case is basically acknowledging the law of supply and demand and letting individual consumer and producer making decision in the market. Capitalism is an ideology, basically making money as a god for people, and actually there is a famous phrase from Karl Marx himself. He said money was you know, I don't know what is proper to mention because it could be misunderstood, but in his word, quote unquote, he said money was a jealous god of Jews, but capitalism made it god of everybody. So, you know, I think it's not Jew only, it's everybody. We have those greedy people and those who really try to earn money. But the key is that the point is capitalism is a system turn money to God and main and ultimate purpose in life. Why? Because if you want to really have a fun, because life is fun, you need to have a money. So the more you work, the more money you make, the more you can buy, and the more you consume, the happier that you can be. That's basically the formula that the capital system, you know, prescribed to people. So. But I think in this case, what I see that's capitalism in this regard is an ideology is different. That we have right now, let's say China, we have market socialism. You have socialism and still you have market system. And I think market system existed much before capitalism. But capitalism used the market system as a very effective tool to establish its promised paradise on the earth. And that's why I kind of see capitalism quite differently than market system. What I see when I look at the capitalism, I say capitalism has been successful, mainly because it recognizes certain elements of human nature. Socialism failed because it did not truly recognize those elements. And those, what I call, the three pillars of capitalist systems is self, interest, and mind. In this case, I use the self and interest separately. Self is ego. Interest is what I call the interest of elephants, or the interest of animal spirits, or Islamic terms, the interest of nafs. And then you have a mind, which is just an instrumental tool for, in this case, ego and elephant, or ego and the animal desires. So capitalism recognized those key elements of human nature. Not only recognize, exploit them to the extreme, and try to create all kind of means, in this case, to ignite those elements of human nature, and actually has been very successful in terms of production and the amount of consumption. So, and it's amazing that it's like, you know, in Islam, there is a promise of paradise, and for those who wake up early to pray early morning prayer. But if people are struggling to do that, in the United States, in Western country, you see people actually wake up much earlier than that because of the promise of capitalism and because of the promise of paradise on the earth. So, and that's why I think the system will recognize the human nature and try to establish its principle based on those three pillars. So that's why I see the success of capitalism comes from this. When Adam Smith talks about self-interest, I say, no, you're not talking about self-interest as one thing. You're talking about ego, because this is an ego-driven culture and society ultimately. You're talking about the interest of animal spirits in human nature. So yes, we have something like this. Yes, in this case, the question is that should you just let these elements of your nature to basically act and, you know, do whatever they want? Or should you really, in this case, try to understand those elements and the weakness and the strengths of those elements and try to put some restriction on them? In this case, that's, I think, regulation as a for government. In this case, is just one side. At the same time, you need to have a kind of moral restriction as well, because if you truly look at the human nature in this regard, it is ultimately, if it's left unchecked, it is suicidal. It is self-destructive. That's why, you know, even you go to philosopher like Kant, it will tell you that no, you ultimately need to have a moral compass. You cannot do it as a creature. So even if you do not have this morality from religion, you have to basically create a certain morality, then you can, as a human being, live based on this morality. So that's why what I see ultimately, the failure of the success of capitalism come from the understanding of this key element of human nature. But the problem is that the elephant or the animal spirit in human nature is only focused on short-term interest and short-term pleasure. What I call it is a blinded to the future. Does not see tomorrow, does not see an hour later. It just thinks and acts based on the interest of the moment. So in this case, if you have such short-sighted nature, and if you let this short-sighted nature rule the human decision behavior, that's what you will get it. So and I think that when you look at consumer behavior, in a short term, it was perfectly reasonable for them to just go and benefit from this credit and to have their realm, realized.
Well, neighbors were seeing neighbors. It was the bandwagon effect, and markets had no, I guess, just the heavens were just opening up. You mentioned Marx, and you also mentioned Adam Smith. I remember seeing when this bubble, the burst housing was really happening and at its peak. There was a cartoon of, I'm trying to remember now, Marx, Adam Smith, Keynes, and the more modern Austrian economist Schumpeter. And they're discussing and they're rolling in their graves, thinking if only we had, or people had listened to them, each one of them, the world would be a much better place. Of course, you could borrow their ideas and make it into a perfect economic world model, but it doesn't happen. And the second point I would make is, with all its faults, as I said earlier, capitalism has an ability, innate ability to reinvent itself for that particular period, doesn't it? In other words, now as we've known that, we have short-term memories also, but hopefully we will have those checks and balances that you and I have discussed in a more profound way. It's not that there were no checks and balances, there was no regulation, but they were just taking a back seat. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's why I don't really see the current crisis as the end for capitalism. I think that's just basically, it's not a hard attack for capitalism. It's just basically losing some blood. It's bleeding. The system is bleeding, and in this case, money is like blood in the body. And I think the system is currently working good to try to fix that.
But because it's losing blood, we don't need a band-aid solution, do we? We need heart surgery, for example, to fix it.
That's why what I see, you can temporarily fix the problem by preventing blood, but if you do not really understand what initially caused the bleeding, then you cannot truly solve the problem in the long term. So that's why what I see now, what we try to take as a measure is really a short-term measure, because there is a fundamental problem with the system. Those are just the sign of some problem within the system. So if we want to truly, in this case, save the system, we need to really, in this case, go deep, try to understand the root cause of the problem. What I see basically, yes, capitalism to a certain extent is successful, try to really, overcome those problems. And I think we will very soon overcome the current crisis as well. But I think there are some other crises, very deep crises and very threatening crises going on as well. But what I see the success of capitalism, I don't see as a real progress for humanity. What I see was recently I was actually taking a train in Atlanta, and I was going from terminal, I was at Terminal D, I was going to go to Terminal E, and I just didn't pay attention to the train and just jump on the train that's coming. And then I was hearing the announcement saying there's a Terminal C, and then Terminal B, and Terminal A. The train was going. It was actually making progress, but it was a regress, not a progress. And then ultimately, when it reached to the last one, it says this train is out of service. So what I see that's exactly what's going on with capitalism. So there is a progress. You see, there is a progress, but that progress I see in terms of a true progress for humanity is actually a backward, is not forward progress. So ultimately, I think what I say, success of capitalism will be its end. In other words, when the train reaches the final destination, bring whatever you kind of expect from capitalism to bring for you, that will be really the time they will say, yeah, the train is out of service. And I think many people now in the West start to understand that really that this train is not taking where they kind of expect them it will take. So, and that's why they understand that kind of they are at the very end of this trip. So my argument is that in this case, basically the promise of capitalism, the promise of paradise by capitalism, is a false promise. And so we are working hard to really, make money and think that ultimately we will be happier and accomplish, which is our ultimate goal of satisfaction in life. And we are granted by even Constitution in the United States, right? Yeah. So, but then, but what I see that we call in literature, they call it an American paradox. So basically when you look at the literature, the data, you see that despite enormous increase in wealth accumulation and in consumption, there has been even decline in subjective well-being. In other words, on average, every single individual now even live much better than the kings that who lived 100 years ago. Right. But what happened, they are not happier than those people. So that's why I think that's what I call this is the dead end. So, and I think that's in this case what I call this is a happiness crisis. And I see there is a happiness crisis of capitalist countries and developed countries now. And I think that is even more serious and more threatening than a financial crisis. That's why I personally try to focus on those crises and try to understand it. But both of them are very much related, and both of them are related to our understanding or misunderstanding of human nature. So that's why I try to personally focus on this one and try to really understand the main cause of both crises and see whether there is any solution.
We can certainly talk about that subject matter, which I thought was highly interesting. I know about numbers and I know what we read as laymen about capitalism, but when I read the subject matter of your research, we will talk about that I guess soon, how understanding what makes people happy. Just because you have tons of money, does that mean you are happier than when you were living hand to mouth? And so I would, that human nature intrigues me a lot. And you did mention and I made a quick note before I came here, the pursuit of happiness is in our Declaration of Independence. Unalienable rights, life, liberty, and so I read that and I said, the founders, Jefferson, whoever, Washington, they foresaw this. They saw the fact that the pursuit of happiness would be, should be part of a Declaration of Independence. So I would like you to now segue into that if you can, and tell us how your research into happiness, well-being, the wellness is so important in understanding human nature so we don't make the same mistakes years from now. Okay,
so I think it's a very good question. I think that's really, individually and socially, it's very important for us ultimately to have a happy life. So happiness is really good in this case thing to have, but it's something is really missing. There are a lot of indicators, particularly in the West now. Last year alone there were over 5,000 books published on happiness. That's clear indication of the demand for that. When people are seeking happiness, they are not happy. That's why they are looking for some, in this case, book and hope that they can actually learn the secret for happiness. So that's why I think there are a lot of indicators out there showing that this is something missing, in this age. So the question is why we're not happy, why we have a lot of things, but we're not really satisfied as we expect to be. I think it's basically is because we don't know who we are. And I think it's mainly because in the West we spend a lot of time to study and examine external worlds, the other universe, but we actually forget to study the inner universe. And I think in this regard, every single human being is a kind of entire universe. So, and I think we have a universe within. So, and I think the issue for us, we need to really go back and study human nature, study the inner universe. Try to really at least understand our inner universe. So what I try to do in this, I try to really, based on mainly writing of Said Nursi and Rumi and Ghazali, and I try to really discover some what I call important aspect of this inner universe. What I come up with ultimately, in Nursi's term, every human body is like a palace. So within this palace there are residents, and the residents of this palace, in this case, are let's say what I call our 7 key residents of this palace. Is what I call the king, the judge, the elephant, the wise advisor, the good advisor, the bad advisor, and the guards. So those are the 7 key residents of this palace. Question is, like, I have 5 children, and we have actually in this case 7 members of the same family. For me, when I look at it, I see peace and happiness in my house, my family, can only be accomplished if I actually know the needs and desires of every single members, and try to basically help every one of them, or every one of them, if ultimately accomplish their goal, that we can have a happiness in house. But if, let's say, my little one's really too sweet and I spend all time feed her and help her and ignore all other members of family, and definitely they cannot be joy and happiness in this house. I see the same thing happening in our palace of human being. So what I see that basically in a capitalist system, the elephant, which is in this case the animal spirit and the nafs in Islamic term, is well served. And basically we try to do everything just serve the elephant, but we ignore the king, which is the spiritual heart. We ignore the judge, which is Vijdan or conscious. So we actually use the advisor, wise advisor, or the mind, which has a certain desires and need, but we use this even as a tool to just serve the elephant. And also what happened, interestingly, the guard is supposed to just provide certain protection for the house, but the guard kind of actually do a coup, as very common in Turkey as well. I think that the guard become a kind of commander-in-chief and control everything. So, and that's why you create kind of inner guards. So the ego and everything become ego-driven. Then you try to think that as if you are, you are God. You can do whatever you want. So the system basically telling you that. So in my understanding, in this case, the true happiness can only be accomplished once we study every element of human nature, understand their capacity, potential, their needs and desires, and try to provide nutrition to disclose their potential. At the same time, try to protect them from any harmful things. I think that's what we can truly bring happiness to our inner palace. So that's why what I try to basically think more about it, try to study them, and try to really understand every element and their needs and desire, and how capitalism actually perceive them, and how in this case we can come up with alternative way to really deal with those elements. That's kind of main what I call a grand theory of inner universe. So I think we need that. We need to really go back and discover the inner universe and understand those elements. Then we can know who we are to a certain extent, and then we can truly provide or have a certain lifestyle to accomplish what you call authentic and enduring happiness and pure happiness.
Interesting. Does materialism by itself, pursuit of money, accumulation of wealth, are they big causes of unhappiness?
Yeah, I think the problem with that is that when material consumption becomes the main goal, the mind is occupied just to make money and to please the elephants. So everything goes around to fulfill the desires of the elephant or the animal desires within human nature. Now the question is, you don't have any time left for the mind, for the heart, for the judge, which is in conscience within you. So you need to, in this case, be balanced. I'm not saying that you should completely ignore your animal side and should not have any what I call sensual pleasure. No, but you have to actually have a balanced way. Make sure that you, in this case, yes, it's fun, let's say, to eat, to listen music, to play, but it's also fun to read because you can have intellectual pleasure when you read and expand your understanding of reality. So, but I think we put a lot of emphasis on what we call on sensual pleasure, and an egoistic pleasure. But we kind of deny that we can have intellectual pleasure, we can have spiritual pleasure. So that's why I think we need to, in this case, capitalism ignoring and to a certain extent actually destroying certain elements of human nature, not just ignoring, destroying them, poisoning them. So that's why it will become hard for you to be a spiritual being and have a spiritual life, you know, in a truly capitalist country. So that's why I think that's once we become, you know, in this case, have a balanced way of lifestyles, try to really recognize and fulfill the needs and desire of each element of our human palace, then I think we can be happier. That's my argument.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, on that uplifting and happy note, I am just cancelling now. I guess we are done with the first session of our talk, and we'll be back with the Q&A session shortly.
Ali Yurtsever with Ruby Forum. What do you offer as an alternative system to capitalism then?
Okay. It's a good question. I think my argument is that we need to really have a more humane system. Humane system, what I mean by that, we need to have more humane market, humane government, mainly because we need to really take the human nature into our consideration. When we set up our policy, we need to know that, yes, indeed, we are rational, but we are not really perfectly rational because we have elephant basically putting restriction or unrational side. So then we cannot really be rational as we expect always. So then we need to, in this case, as a government, have a certain regulation. As an individual, have a certain moral restraint in order to basically have a long-term happiness. So that's why my argument is that we need to really, if we're going to stick with, I'm not sure that we can do with capitalism ultimately, but I think I don't have any problem with market system. I think capitalism is an ideology serving ego and elephant cannot provide true happiness to human beings. It has to acknowledge and has to serve other elements of human nature. And once the system truly acknowledge that and truly serve that, then I think the system can survive. That's my point. But you know.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Abraham.
Please stand if you can.
Abraham Abidor, formerly with the Foreign Agricultural Service. I agree with your assertion that it's important in life also to be mentally and spiritually rich. My question is about to what extent economic human behavior and the performance of capitalistic markets is controlled by cycles, which are preordained, you know, the 10-year cycle, 20-year cycle, 50-year cycles. The people that I follow, they call the foundation, since the early 30s, Dewey was a leading member of that group. They think that what we are going right now is a false recovery in the markets, in the hope and so on. They think that the markets are heading toward a big crash by 2011, 12, and 13. The dollar, the stock market, and everything. This is just a false technical rally and so on. Could you please comment on that?
I think that's. I personally think that's really. What we call in economics, we call business cycle. So you kind of have a cycle, but I think the question is to really understand what are causing the cycle, and I think we have a cycle mainly because that we are not perfectly rational. We are not really acting based on a rational principle because we have other elements of human nature. So that's why we are predictably irrational. And actually, it's amazing that you see when doing the downturn in economy, people are almost most of people start become pessimistic, and it got worse and worse. And when it start to recover, everybody got optimistic, and it got. In this case, you have a boom again. That's what the ultimate cycle. The question is, you know, if you are truly rational, and if you have an historical knowledge and truly know this is how people actually behave, then you, at least as a rational person, will not actually be affected by, you know, the cycle. You will just make a rational decision for long term. My argument is that it depends on whether you truly disclose all elements of your nature, whether you're really acting because of an animal instinct or animal spirit, or whether you really have a balanced life in your palace and you try to basically be rational as well, not just acting based on the short-term interest. That's why I think, yes, in practice, you look at the data, you see the cycle, it's just a trend, and that's why some will argue that's just a normal, that's just another business cycle. It will happen. It's not possible to prevent. I don't agree with that. I think this cycle is happening because of our misunderstanding of human nature. If we truly understand the root cause of the cycle, we can actually predict the irrational behavior and actually do something to prevent it. That's my argument. And I think we are not at this level yet. We're just thinking that, you know, that's normal. It's just part of being a human being.
Well, predictions come into it. I mean, how do you predict? I mean, in my own business, for example,
the prediction of irrationality. That's why I'm saying that. I'm not saying prediction, but we're doing prediction. Our prediction is based on, again, our short-sighted side. We're not really rational prediction. Right. So we're just thinking based on the short-term events. So what I mean that if we, in economics, first we used to assume that humans are perfectly rational. Then we gave up this assumption. We say, no, we have bounded rationality. In other words, under certain circumstances, basically, you cannot be rational. You act, you do something which you basically don't approve it. You don't think it's good for you, but you do it, you know. So like many addiction come from this. That's what I try to explain. But then I think right now we have a new trend and some new studies saying that no, it's not that only. We are predictably irrational. So we can actually, in this case, predict that under which circumstance that human can act irrationally. My argument that once we know more about human nature, we can have better prediction about irrational behavior of human being, and then we can come up with better policy as a government to prevent that, and as an individual, as a society, we can come up with better moral principle to prevent that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Ahmed Ahmed with the Minaret of Freedom Institute. First, thank you for this very profound presentation. I do have a question, though. You, in your wonderful expression about how capitalism exploits the market for its ideology, you didn't address the question, you alluded to, but didn't address the question of how capitalists often suppress the market in order to serve the same purposes. I'm thinking, for example, about the credit expansion that was behind the recent events, legislation that facilitated home loans to people who can't afford them, and of course the bailouts that are impeding what Schumpeter called the creative destructive aspects of capitalism that otherwise would reallocate resources. So there's a political aspect. It's not just irrationality. There's a short-sighted, self-interested, greedy calculation that certain people use in order to use the political system to their ends. And I'm wondering, doesn't that make what you're trying to do more difficult?
Yeah. I think that's why the key is that you look at every player. One of the players in this case is you will have politician. The politician in this system, what they try to maximize their votes. What they do for that one, they actually act in a short term, come up with a policy just to maximize, to happy their, in this case, constituents, and try to maximize the likelihood for themselves to be elected again. So in this regard, they are trapped within the same game. So they have a very same nature. They try to maximize their self-interest, in this case, the interest of their animal spirit. So that's why they are making the same mistake. And I think that's why you can, you cannot blame only politicians, only regulators, or only consumers. I think we are all perhaps equally blamed for this crisis. It's mainly because we all are acting based on our misunderstanding of human nature, and we all are making mistake and contributing to the crisis. That's my argument.
Yes, sir.
Necati Bey, thank you very much. My name is Michael Kurtz. I'm an educator. There's a lot that we have to digest from what you said. You remind me a little bit, I think it was Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst system except for everything else. And I think the same may go for capitalism, is the worst system. Judging by what I see here, most of us came to this country, by your accent and my accent for sure, for the American dream. And we worked very hard. And we raised our families and were very successful and have done something with ourselves. But my question, what you said, is the American dream over? I believe, for example, that our generation, this generation now, will live the best that can be lived. That we're probably going downhill now. Is that what you were saying also?
Okay. Yeah, I think my ultimate argument is that the American dream is a nightmare. It's a nightmare, not in term of really material success. And I think American dream can be realized, and are being realized for many people in terms of the material success. But it's a nightmare in terms of what we truly expect from this dream. What I see, basically, what I see, a promise of capitalism for happiness. That's what we ultimately want. Is like this example. It says, in old time, Italian peasants, they actually develop a very nice way to actually attach a stick to the nose of their donkey and put a little bit weight on that stick. And basically the donkey will think that, she has only a few feet to reach this reward. And then the donkey will run, try to get the reward. So every time you will actually, move one step, so you're not there, but it's very close. Maybe one more step. But ultimately, you will understand that really this is not what you as a human being want and accomplish. So in this regard, what I see, yes, material gain is important, but it's not everything when you truly understand human nature. Material gain is necessary to a certain extent, but there are a lot of studies indicate that income up to a certain level indeed has impact on happiness. But beyond that, it virtually has no impact. So in this regard, I think, American dream, I think, can be a nightmare once you have the dream realized and have this big car, big house, and in this case a lot of consumption. But I understand that really that's not what you're really asking for. So,
yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Amin. I remember a teacher once gave me this analogy. I thought it was very beautiful. And it was like three men were dressing stonemasons. And the first man, the teacher went up to the person and said, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "Well, I'm earning my living. I have children to support. What do you think I'm doing? I'm dressing stone." The second person, he says, "What are you doing?" The man says, "Well, I'm just cutting the stone." But the third man, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a cathedral." But he was whistling. And the question I ask is, how do we get out of the addiction? Because some are addicted, not all. How do we get out of the assumption, which is very individual-centric? Now, in one way, it's a blessing in America that we have the opportunity to develop individually. It breaks us out of a great cultural norm and permits us to search for that meaning of happiness. But on another level, it becomes every man or woman for themselves. And one of my images is that it's a little like the Titanic. On the bottom deck, it's been filled with water for 30 or 40 years. Okay, that's nothing new. It's been drowning, it's been desperate. The middle deck has been relatively dry and playing shuffleboard, and now it's starting to be a bit awash. But the upper deck, things have never been better. Okay, there's plenty of lobster, the band is playing on, but of course we're all in this one connected boat. How, and I don't know if it's possible, but how do we birth a new kind of consciousness? If not for the whole, how do we start to develop it, at least for those who are able to do it? Sometimes I think it's better to have a lifeboat than try to save the whole ship. What do you think?
I think it's a very, very good question. I think it's really, what I like is Socrates once said, he says, unexamined life is not worth living. And I think it's really important to examine life, to ask such serious question, and to really see whether we can do as an individual, we can do anything to really, in this case, change our life. And I think we can do something. And I think the system in this regard, to a certain extent, lets you to do that. But I think you need to really be aware of invisible traps in the system. And in this regard, what I see basically, it is once you understand yourself and study yourself and truly understand that what your mind is asking for, as you explained in that story, your mind asking for meaning. So you need to have more meaningful life. It doesn't matter whether this meaning comes from you because of your Christian understanding or Muslim understanding or Buddhism. It doesn't matter. The key is that the mind just cannot actually live with the ultimate meaningless life, because in this case, if everything ultimately is meaningless for you, and I think that's really very hard for the mind to digest, to accept. So you need to question, in this case, seek for some certain meaning in your life, and come up with something that you think is actually more important than any material gain, any material success. So that's why I think that's really important for the mind particularly. But at the same time, you need to, in this case, see what your heart is looking for. You know, is it really a matter of dating, mating, or a matter of family? That what I see when you understand your heart, and you see that the heart has almost infinite love, the question is, how can this infinite love be satisfied? That's why you need to, in this case, seek something or someone who can truly satisfy the desires of your heart as well. That's why I think it really ultimately is all about understanding the key elements of your nature and try to study them, see really whether there is anything out there can truly satisfy you spiritually, intellectually, emotionally. So is not just actually essential, and I think other thing is to kind of see that we need to really find a way to minimize, if it's not possible, to completely eliminate those egoistic pleasure. And I think that's very much it's a kind of a driving force in this culture particularly, but I think there's no way to ultimately satisfy your egoistic pleasure, because you are in constant competition with everybody. Try to, do show business and try to show that you're better than the other. That's impossible for you in terms of your possession, in terms of your career, everything. So that's why I think I kind of recognize that you can gain certain pleasure, we'll call pleasure of honor, of egoistic pleasure, but I see that is ultimately a self-destructive, and it's not easy to really satisfy. So my argument is you need to minimize as much as possible and you get rid of it, and try to in your lifestyles and do something that you can gain more spiritual, get more in this case intellectual pleasure. So you don't just work to make money and consume and have sensual pleasure. So you just also try to really have certain activity like the one that we have right now, give you intellectual and I think to a certain extent spiritual pleasure.
I'm thinking about Maslow, if you remember the
Correct,
Maslow
yes.
And some, of course, in our world are too fat, but some in our world don't have sufficient. And the task seems very different. If you're desperately struggling to survive, to provide health for your children, to provide basic food or safety, you don't have so much time to wonder who you are. You're basically concerned with survival.
Correct, exactly.
All right, so we have to interrupt you. We have another gentleman here.
Zafer Pirim, Turkish American Chamber of Trade. What I understand from your assertions, the train of the capitalism is going to be out of service one day. How do you think this is going to be possible, since we always have this greedy elephant?
Yeah, I think it's good questions. I think since we have a greedy elephant, that seems like it's always kind of driving us towards something. But I think once you reach the dead ends, and since you are not just elephants, since you have this, in this case, the king, the advisor out there, they will remind you, tell you that, you know what, you have been deceived by the elephant for that long time. Just, in this case, try to understand and train and control the elephant and take the charge of the palace. And I think when, in this case, you come to your sense, in other words, that in this case, your heart and mind take control of the palace, then you will, in this case, basically, you will understand that you are on the wrong train, perhaps. You need to change the train.
Dr. Aydin, hate to interrupt you, but we are at the end of this session. Capitalism, though, is practiced in various forms and degrees throughout the world, right? It's not just our type. I mean, in Russia, for example, South Korea, more bureaucratic more governmental interference, oligarchs in Russia and other places. So I just want to make sure that we understand that it's not capitalism equals Britain and the US. Well, on that, I guess we ought to stop. Thank you very much for your presentation, keen insight, and we appreciate your being here. Thank you.